is Choices from Struggle to Strength. Today, I'm very happy to have Ashley Pride with us. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, Ruth. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Ashley, tell us a little bit about what you're passionate about and why.
Oh my goodness. When you talk about passion, the list seems like it grows every day. I'm passionate about so many things. I think I'm passionate about being passionate, which, you know, I I don't know if that's a thing that I realized until I got around like some fanatics and like was magnetized by just how they were lit up. So finding ways to light other people up or helping them find what lights them up is what lights me up.
Hmm. So, share your story about the difficult events that you've experienced and how that's affected you.
I know we have 20 minutes. I know we have 20 minutes, but I think recognizing that as part of the human experience, we all have ups and downs. And what allows me to get up and do what I do every day is recognizing that the struggles that have been a part of my life are proof that God exists
Mm.
and that God is with me always. Um, the moment that comes to mind is when I found that my nephew was no longer with us. He passed at 9 months,
Mm.
the day that I returned from the one vacation that I allowed myself to take.
Mm.
Um, losing the youngest member of my family, my baby, um, juxtaposed against probably the like one of the heights of my experience, especially as like a caregiver, someone that's very like deep in their work and wasn't taking time for
Mm.
myself, to have that height, and be filled with such excitement to going to such deep depths and grief.
Mm.
It was just, it was extremely traumatic. And I still don't share the fullness of the story because I'm still trying to reconcile
Mm-hmm.
how that came to be, how I feel about being without him.
Mm-hmm.
And grief, losing a loved one, really never goes away.
No, it doesn't.
So, it's an ongoing experience that I've channeled into being more understanding and empathetic to other people who are walking around with, the weight of the world on their shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
hurting and not really understanding how to cope with, live with, work with, and be with the grief, but also make room for themselves, make room for growth and opportunities to heal and deal with something that, you know, affects you for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say a lot of that time after he passed was a blur
Mm-hmm.
because I jumped into doer mode.
Mm-hmm.
I did not process. I didn't cry.
Mm-hmm.
I was caring for others as a coping mechanism for myself.
Right.
And I didn't realize until the actual day of the funeral. There was a lot going on, and I was more comfortable dealing with logistics and just like pushing and trudging and, making sure that all of the pieces were in place.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had tasked myself with doing was creating a slideshow of the images of his life. While short, he brought so much joy, so
Mm.
much love.
Mhm.
He was so intelligent for someone that couldn't speak. I mean, at 9 months, his first word was red.
Aw.
And um, he loved when I made jewelry, which most times loud noises or abrupt sounds could be startling.
Mhm.
He was enraptured by whatever was going on with my workstation. I'm like, you're supposed to be playing. And he was 100% invested and curious and um, just very involved for someone that just came here as a blessing for my family. I just remember being very present in the moments while he was here,
Mhm.
which I think was what helped to assure me that I made the most of the connection that I had with him
Mm.
during his time here.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, Lots of physical touch, lots of connection, um, lots of time spent just being in the moment, not
Mm.
multitasking or,
Mhm.
worrying about other things. But on the other side of that, I crashed at the funeral because the slideshow was not able to be presented to people the way that I wanted it to. I
Mm.
was in the bathroom on the floor
Mm.
on my computer trying like a mad woman to put it together and make it work.
Mm.
In reality, I just wasn't facing loved ones who were grieving and wanted to be in the moment with me.
Mhm.
I was engrossed in the art and the images that I had left behind. So it's both a story of later recognizing where my pain was and where my healing was, right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
art itself allowed me to find joy in
Mhm.
it, you know,
Mhm. In a
thinking
difficult
through
time. Mhm.
thinking through the past, thinking through the creative process, but it also hindered me in the moment, right? It was kind of both sides of the same coin
Right.
because I put so much meaning into that being what I had to do that
Mhm.
I wasn't able to be present
Mm.
for the grieving process.
Mm. So was there a particular time when you realized that you needed to deal with your grief in a different way?
Yeah, I sought counseling after because the silence in his absence
Mm.
was so deafening.
Mm.
I was used to hearing, laughter and
Chatter.
chatter bustling around the house, footsteps and things like that. And the void that he left, I noticed I was filling with things that were not good for me.
Mm.
I was going down a path that I didn't want for myself,
Mhm.
that could have been more harmful long term if I didn't recognize that the silence itself was supposed to be peaceful.
Mm.
I think we think of peace and like serenity um, in quietness as a good thing, and the silence hurt me more than anything.
Mm.
So I talked to someone about healing strategies and, you know, continuing to lean into my art. I did more journaling. I opened up in terms of like having conversation with people that were also grieving.
Mhm.
And that also meant just listening sometimes. It didn't mean that I had to talk,
Mhm.
but hearing other people's stories really empowered me on the other side
Mm.
of that horrific experience, to understand that SIDS happens, that, when you lose a child, it is very difficult to deal with.
Mhm.
and that you're not alone, that there is life after death, that God is with you. And there's so many things that we don't understand about this world, but
Mhm.
you know, being there for each other and being in community with each other, there's healing in that.
Mm. So you've mentioned a few things, but how has dealing with all of this made you a stronger person?
Well, I think the emphasis on community
Mm.
and creating in community
Mhm.
has blossomed from this experience. For me, it's empowered me to step into more rooms, to be more open and vulnerable,
Mm.
to share what's really going on instead of focusing on, keeping up a facade. I was more timid to speak up about things that were bothering me, or, just kind of bite my tongue in favor of letting someone else be in the spotlight. And I'm here, which is an indication in itself that that part of me that was probably keeping myself safe, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have to be thankful for those moments because I really wasn't ready then.
Mm.
Wasn't ready to face whatever I had going on in my head, whatever I was dealing with in terms of my grief. I needed to have that time for myself, between myself and God, between myself and people that are closest to me, and then connect with people that I don't know yet who have similar stories or experiences,
Mm.
and experiences that are different from me, but that need some perspective
Mhm.
and understanding that our differences are also enough to bring us together, right? That
Mm.
that humanness
Mhm.
and connection is where the healing happens.
Mhm. Yes. Community is so important, and focusing on the things that we have in common. There are lots of things that can divide us, but there are many things that we have in common as well. So, what doors or opportunities has this struggle opened for you?
I haven't talked about this much, right? Like this particular story about my nephew, because it's still very present in
Mm.
my life, very real. The wound seems as fresh, and, you know, it's been years, and sitting with it, being with it, and sharing it is an opportunity in itself. You know,
Mhm.
I'm still here to pass on what I've learned about being with him, being vulnerable and open to sharing my story in
Mhm.
places like this, but also the kindness community,
Mhm.
which has been cultivated and grown on Twitter. Uh, that is a newer addition to my life within this past year.
Mm.
And I'd written off social media as a place where I couldn't exist and be myself.
Mm.
Um, in fact, when my nephew passed, I stopped posting and sharing
Mm.
because, in the outpouring of love and support, I felt like I was drowning, which is the
Mm.
opposite of what people sharing their condolences is supposed to do. It's supposed to be
Right.
comforting.
Right.
And I felt like I was choking. Um, that whole experience took something away from me in terms of how I connected, and I had to find another way.
Mm.
Um, so being self compassionate, understanding for myself what I needed,
Right.
recognizing that it wasn't going to come in the form of a blueprint or a book, but that I had to dig deep, deep,
Mhm. Mhm.
and really assess my needs, which are different than the next person's.
Right.
That personal journey, finding another place to show up and share the very real stuff,
Mhm.
um, without judgment, without fear or concern, all of that I needed to be able to create and cultivate that. So the kindness community, which uh, I co-host and co-curate, these experiences with Dan Roeder and Robert Peter Paul through the Twitter platform. We've hosted a variety of amazing safe spaces for people to be able to talk about the day to day, but really get a big picture understanding of where we can be more kind to
Mm,
ourselves and in our relationships with other people. Um, yeah. Along with that, right? Like the things have just expanded
mm,
from recognizing that the present is the most important thing that we have.
mm. Let's dive a little bit more into self-care. You've mentioned it, but what does self-care look like for you?
Self care. Well, I think like the conversation around self care is disjointed right now. So for me, I think self care is whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel alive, whatever keeps your body moving and grooving in the best way possible. Um, at the height of the pandemic, I talked to a friend who was masterful at posting memes.
Mm,
And I'm like, that's self care. She's like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what self care is. She thought of it as like a buzzword, but it didn't click. And I was explaining that what she was doing was finding images and art that already exists in our culture,
mm-hmm,
creating relevance around it, sharing it with friends and family, making sure that laughter and fun and that connection was happening in real time. That
mm-hmm,
is an art in itself. And the experience of doing it and making herself feel better was self care.
mm,
My example of self care is being more conscious of the time that I'm spending and not giving myself too much of a tough love chat, if you will. I know I was probably really hard on myself
mm-hmm,
before going through this experience, but time and time again, I learned that the more that I learn to let go and trust God, just showing up and doing my best
mm,
is self care.
mm-hmm,
So, things like prayer,
mm,
I'm like really dialed into like aromatherapy and candles. I take long showers and I look to the sky whenever I'm having a rough time. I
mm,
won't say just a rough time, I look to the sky no matter what. But the sense that, I'm a part of something bigger just really brings me peace. So if you look at my gallery, it's like filled with clouds. It's filled with clouds, and that's self-care to me.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, self-care definitely does look different to different people, and we need to find what works for us. I take walks in nature. I pray too.
Yeah.
Music is good.
I love music too. I have a playlist for everything. I have a playlist for everything, and I think music is the thing that also brings us all together. I haven't met a person that doesn't have like a song attached to a feeling, attached to a nostalgic moment, or music is probably a part of every major experience in our lives. So you know, um, it evokes a lot in us. I think art, which is what you're talking about, is at the root of all of these things. It's just
Right.
the art of figuring out what works for us.
Mm-hmm.
So, and self-kindness from the inside out.
You mentioned art. I talk to a lot of people who tell me that they're not creative, but I believe everybody is creative, and often we just block our creativity.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's blocking. I feel like we have a disconnect.
Mm,
There's a misunderstanding about what creativity is.
mhm.
And for people that don't recognize their strengths as creative force,
Okay. Mhm.
they're missing out.
Right.
I have a friend that can work their way through a conversation like nobody's business, but then they get off and say that they're not creative. And I'm like, do you know what you just did? I'm like completely in awe and in shock. And, someone that's probably one of the most creative beings that I know, that's been writing since they could talk. They said, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm not creative like you. Well, I tend to just take on any creative endeavor as a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be good at something, and it doesn't have to produce something that's sellable, that makes sense. Creating for the sake of creating is what makes you creative. So as
Mm-hmm.
long as you take a step to do a thing, whatever you have within you, your essence is making the creation a thing. I also believe that, you know, um, God is the ultimate creator.
Mm-hmm.
So, being made in his image, we have within us the ability to create just because.
Right.
Um, every time I hear someone say, I'm not creative, it's like, oh man.
Yes, you are.
And then I go to town and I just start pointing out things. And I mean, I think that's part of the conversation around passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Showing people where their strengths lie if they don't already know,
Mm-hmm.
amplifying parts of their story that are really amazing. We
Mm-hmm.
are we are awesome humans, okay? We're awesome.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us, Ashley?
I'm really grateful for this conversation. And I think gratitude for where you are right now, where we are right now, is something that might be hard for some,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's one of the missing pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it doesn't make sense, finding something to be grateful for
Mm-hmm.
can bring you out of the depths of your experience, to
Mm-hmm.
find something that's beautiful, to find something that's worth it. And you are worth that experience.
Yes.
No matter who you are or what it is that you're going through, I want you to know that you are worth it. And I'm glad that you're here. You, Ruth, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be
I'm
here.
glad you're here.
Thank you. Me too. Um, I believe that there's a way to turn the craziness in this world into crafting.
Mm-hmm.
So find something to create with, and I think that can bring you back to yourself, bring you back to something that you find joy in. Um, I love the idea of linking to something in your childhood that you haven't been able to do in forever, just to give yourself a jolt of
Ah.
joy. That is probably like the starting place for people that really just have no clue what to do next. Do
Mm.
that every chance you get, and you'll see that things will get a little brighter.
Yes, um, too often we lose that wonder and excitement that we had when we were young, right?
Yeah,
So if we can go back there, it helps.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. Ashley, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm A Pride Designs. That's A for Ashley, Pride, that's my last name. And I'm designing just a beautiful life for myself and helping other people to do the same. So you can find me on Twitter at A Pride Designs, Instagram at A Pride Designs. I think my actual website is ashleypride.com. So if you're interested in connecting with me, those are the places that you can go to just be a part of the experience, to get some joy for yourself too.
Thank you very much for sharing your joy with us today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation when we have our Twitter space.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.